Hey to all you Galatians studying guys and gals. We're looking today at Galatians 3, 6 through 29. Sons of Abraham by faith. So, let's just jump right in here. Of course, it's all about a covenant, with the Jews. And the Jews the saved Jews of Galatia were being told, and the Gentiles of Galatia were being told by the legalistic Jews that you had to still keep the law. And of course, I thought a little background would help. God made a covenant with Abraham, continuing to argue for the belief that the Galatians had foolishly, Paul here is continuing to argue for the belief that the Galatians had foolishly taken on that embracing the law was needed for their salvation. God made a covenant with Israel. The backstory of covenants, it's agreement between two parties to become a Jew. So you had to embrace two covenants here. The Abrahamic covenant is the first one we're going to look at. Genesis 12:3 with Abraham was predicated on the promise that I will bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you. And the covenant was made in a unique way, which was typical in those days. In Abraham's day, a covenant or agreements were made called by cutting a covenant, where we get our term to cut a deal. And so you would take several animals, cut them in two pieces, lay them on the ground. The people involved in the covenant would walk between the pieces, declare their side of the covenant. And the idea of the severed animal is a way of saying that this will happen to me if I violate the covenant. Abraham, of course, never walked between the animals when God made his covenant with Abraham, because he knew Abraham couldn't keep his part of the bargain. And an unconditional and unilateral covenant, there was no way Abraham to break the covenant. It was all on God. So in Genesis 15, 1 through 18, none of his descendants could do nothing to violate the covenant. Paul is going to use this understanding that Abraham believed in God. Now, the Mosaic covenant, there's lots of covenants, in the legalistic people of the day of the Church of Galatia were, of course, telling the new Jewish or Gentile Christians, if they wanted to be saved, they had to embrace rules, such as circumcision. Now, that was a big deal then. It's not so much now, but it was huge in that day. And to embrace the Mosaic law and covenant, which was not unilateral in a covenant, it was made between Israel and God. It promised safety, blessings, and prosperity in return for obedience to the precepts of the law. It was conditional, okay? So look at verses 6 through 9. Just as you cannot be born a Christian, and even though the Jews thought they were the sons of Abraham by birth, DNA makes it true, Abraham believed God, and God created it to him as righteousness. Therefore, if you believe by faith, you're a child of Abraham. And now Paul is going to enlarge on that statement. Verses 8 through 9. Of faith. Those that believe of faith are blessed. You guys are looking for a special blessing by keeping rules, he's saying, and the law, but it all comes by faith. We've talked about faith, especially when we studied Matthew. That sounded too simple for the Galatians. And it does sound simple. We're going to look at that as we go through Galatians. We're no different than the Galatians. But not us, of course. We don't want to read too much into something, do we? We know the Jewish legalists were wrong, as Paul tells us so. So where did the legalist go wrong? They assumed God made the Mosaic law was binding on the church like it was to Israel, which is wrong. They erred in believing in their own scriptures. Now we're dealing with the new covenant, Luke 20:22. That is all it is called. And even it's prophesied in Jeremiah 31 through 32. It is replacing the Mosaic covenant as the Jews broke it. But the Jews keep trying to combine the two first covenants, and you can't. We're the same. We get the same things wrong. Why don't we keep the Sabbath on Saturday? The church is not commanded to keep the law. So what happens to those who are not of faith and want to go by the law? No. Do we have to keep rules? Verse 10, quoting Deuteronomy, it's hard for me to say, 28:15 through 68. If you want to live under the law, you'll be cursed if you don't abide by all things. The law pronounces a curse, verse 11, and concludes that no one is justified by the law. This was Paul, a Pharisee, who kept the law. The righteousness will live by faith. And he is quoting Habakkuk 2 through 4. How did the Jews miss so many verses from the Old Testament related to faith? Well, that's a good question. Look at verse 12. Verse 12, if I give you rules, I am asking you to do them. We give our kids rules, do we not? The law means doing. The law is not of faith. Verse 12. Think about that. The law is all about doing and do and do and do and do. And the law and faith are incompatible. Not contrary to each other, but they're incompatible. One is about doing and one is about believing with faith. Oh, this is a good study. I'll see y'all next week.